Continue. Hello, and welcome to today's session. Host your web apps with Microsoft Azure App Service. Sydney Andrews will be our instructor today, and he'll have a very demo-heavy session. There will be no slides, only demos. And so with that, I will turn it over to Sydney, who will walk us through a few different ways to get your web apps up and going.
All right, Matt, thank you so much for that great introduction. Hey, everyone, if you see a blank screen on my monitor right now, that means you're at the right place. We are going to go all in on Azure App Service today. We're going to talk about Azure App Service web apps. And we'll even have time to talk about static web apps. We'll talk about some of the different type of JavaScript-based applications you can deploy to them, some of the different methodologies for deploying them, and really set a foundation that we're going to use for the 3 more sessions we have in this series, where we're going to go deeply into like deployment slots, container-based deployments, and it's going to be a lot of fun, and really looking forward to doing all of this together. But before we go into any of the really crazy stuff, I always like to just set a base and have our very first session where we all make sure that we have the same level of knowledge about App Service. So everything I know about App Service, I'm going to give to you today, and it's not much, so don't fret. But the fun thing is we're going to be very demo heavy. So you see a blank screen, that means we're going to go in and we're going to just go to my browser and docs.com. That's docs.com. If you don't know already, docs.com is the URL to the Microsoft documentation homepage. Remember that, it's a lot of fun. docs.com. Again, docs.com. Now, one of the cool things is there's some other URLs off of that. Like for instance, if you, after the session, want to learn some more, docs.com/learn will take you to Microsoft Learn. I'll just show you that right now. Docs.com/learn. Boom, will take you right to Microsoft Learn, where you can get hands-on with some of the topics we talked about today. And I'm going to share with you some Microsoft Learn modules that you can complete to help you in your journey learning about app services. But like I said at first, we're going to go to docs.com. And today we want to learn about Azure App Services. So we can go to Azure. And we have lots of different Azure products we can learn about. They have some featured products. Luckily for us, App Service is one of the featured products. But you can actually list all products out, or you can go by category. So today we're going to go to the web category. And we're just going to leave this page open all day because we're going to keep coming back and forth to it. The first product we're going to learn about today is Azure App Service. So I'm going to go here to Azure App Service and just open this in a new tab. And this takes us to the App Service documentation overview or landing page. And this is great because this is where we can get to some of the most important things. Like if I've never used App Service before, what is App Service? If I know that I want to use App Service, I want to deploy a specific type of application App Service, I can get to the quick starts. If I want to go into a much deeper scenario that's kind of mirrors real world, so not quite hello world, just that next step of complexity, I can go to the tutorial section. And then as you go further and further down, you'll see even more stuff to do. Like for instance, when we talk about containers next week, we'll have a session specifically about that. When we talk about stage deployments, we'll have a section specifically about that. Now, I take you to the documentation page because we're going to use this as we go. And one of the very first things we want to do is just figure out how do you create an app service web app. Now, if you go to one of the quick starts, I'll just click first Node.js app. It's going to tell you, hey, you can create this entirely within Visual Studio Code. You can create it using a portal. You can create it using Azure Resource Manager templates. Today, I'll show you a couple different ways to create it. So the first way I'm going to create is I'm going to go to the Azure Portal. Just like we do with everything else, I'm going to try my best to share URLs with you as we go. So Azure Portal is going to be portal.azure.com. That's again, portal.azure.com. And I'm going to put an announcement in the Q&A tab whenever I share a new link like that. So portal.azure.com, put an announcement in the Q&A tab. That Q&A tab that you see here in Teams is wonderful. If you got any questions throughout our sessions, just pop it in the Q&A. We'll try to answer that as we go. So portal.azure.com takes us to the Azure portal. Sometimes you may need to log in again. For me, I log in so much it probably doesn't need it anymore. From here, I can get to all the different things I want to create in Azure. Now, just make today really simple. I have a resource group called MSUS Dev. And this is the resource group I'm going to use for all the demos today. So I'm just showing you that right now. There's no demo magic here. It's completely empty. No deployments have been made to it. So I haven't deployed something and hidden it. No craziness. We're starting from scratch. This is going to be scratch built completely new. So let's create our first app service web app. So I'm going to click Microsoft Azure up here. It's going to take me back to the home page. I'm going to select create a resource. Now from here, I'm going to select web app because I would like to create a web app. Now remember earlier we said we're going to use our resource group, MS/US Dev. So I'll go ahead and select that. I have multiple subscriptions normally, but today I filtered it down. So I'm just showing my concierge subscription. If you've ever seen a terminology before, that's the same term you're going to see for your subscriptions if you're doing a hands-on lab using Microsoft Learn. Can you tell I'm a big fan of Microsoft Learn? All right, going from there, we're going to create a web app. I'm just going to call it Sydney Fun Web App First. Now, the name we put here is going to get a URL, .azurewebsites.net. So this name needs to be globally unique. So that little quick check you saw was a check for global uniqueness, and the green check mark indicates that this is a globally unique name. I will be able to create a web app with this name. Now, I can either create a web app that uses a certain code stack, or I can deploy a Docker container to that web app immediately. Now, the Docker container option, I'm going to hold off on for now because that's what we're going to really focus on in one of our future sessions in this series. Today, we're just going to use web apps with a code stack. Now, I can select a runtime stack. There's quite a few. There's .NET, Java, Node, PHP, Python, Ruby, lots of cool stuff. For today, I'm just going to do Node 14. And I could choose to deploy it to either a Linux or Windows App Service instance. Now, just for fun, I'm going to do Windows, but I'm going to come back and do a Linux version later. Now, once I choose that, it says, okay, where do you want to deploy it to? I'm going to deploy to ECUS. And then the way app services are built, they're built using app service plans. An app service plan is a certain allocation of memory and compute, and you're built per app service plan. And you can deploy multiple web apps to that app service plan. So that becomes really useful if you're if you're deploying multiple applications with different levels of usage. You'd be shocked how much you can fit into an app service plan rather than, hey, one application is using 25% as compute while another application is using 90%. You can manage it a little bit better with these app service plans. So just keep things simple. I'm going to hit review and create. It's going to create a web app. It's going to create an app service plan too. So it's going to create 2 resources for me. And the app service plan is going to use the S1 or standard 1 SKU. It's even going to give me an estimate of how much I should expect to pay per month for this app service instance. I'm going to hit create. It's going to submit the deployment to Azure. And now we have a deployment which is in progress. But for start time, if you ever need support, a correlation ID, and there's some metadata about it. While this is deploying, just one really cool thing, every deployment in Azure is done using ARM templates. Somebody says, hey, can we zoom in a little bit? Let's see. Zoom in a little bit more. Let's try this. I'm going to try zooming in to 200. And if I need to zoom in again, just post in the Q&As and I will I'll come back and try and fix that again. All right, so our web app has been deployed in our app service plan. What I was saying was one of the cool things is with Azure, everything you deploy is done using ARM templates. These are JSON files that describe to Azure what to deploy. You can always take a view or look at these ARM templates. You can even see the inputs and outputs from the different templates. So here we inputted quite a few information. I'm just going to unmask this stuff. I have a really cool presentation mask. Whenever I'm doing demos, sometimes I like to hide stuff, but there's nothing here I need to hide. I'll turn my presentation mask back on. All right, now I'm going to go to my web app, and this is a Windows web app, but it's configured to run a Node application. If I click Browse, it'll take me to a landing page. This is just a really quick hosting start.html file, and this hosting start.html file is just there until you deploy something. Now, a couple questions, good questions coming in through in Q&A. Somebody says, hey, this might be covered later, but is there a limit to the amount of slots or web apps you can have with an app service plan versus the amount of containers you can have? for general app service, there is some limits on the amount of things you can deploy. So for app service plan, I'm actually going to look this up. If I go to app service documentation, click resources, I believe it's under resources, pricing, service updates. I think I'm not sure if it's under quota information. There we go. Yeah, it is under quota information. So I have a standard app service plan. I don't have a logical limit on the amount of things I can deploy to there, other than I can have 100 app service plans per resource group. Each app service plan is not limited in the amount of web, mobile, API apps that can be deployed to it. Now, I can scale out up to 10 dedicated horizontal instances of my app service plan. But if I want to put 100 web apps on there, I can. Now, you notice there's a little number 2 here. That means there's a little footer. Let's go find the footer. The actual number of apps that you can host on these machines depends on the activity of the apps, the size of the machine instances, and corresponding resource utilization. So yes, there's nothing in Azure that prevents you from hosting hundreds of web apps within a single app service plan, but you actually might run out of compute and memory if you do that. So it's really up to you and your application, how many web apps you want to put in an app service plan, how many app instances you want to put per plan. But the only limitation here is really the amount of app service plans you can have in a resource group. And that's 100 app service plans per resource group. And when you scale them out horizontally, so for instance, let's say I have an app service plan with 2 web apps, one for my front end, one for my back end. I can scale out up to 10 instances horizontally. And what that means is that I essentially have 20 things, 10 horizontal web front ends and 10 horizontal web back ends that I can do because I can horizontally scale out the app service plan. So hopefully that answered the first Q&A question. We've got a couple more coming in, and I'll try to answer them as we go, but I'm gonna keep some momentum going. Now, you saw me create a web app using the portal, but I can do the same thing using Azure CLI. So I'm gonna use Quake mode from my Windows terminal and pop it open, and I'm going to type in AZ login to log into the Azure CLI. Let me zoom in just a little bit, just in case. So AZ login, it's gonna open my browser and log me into Azure. Gonna pop window open again. It says, okay, you have access to a lot of subscriptions, so let's list them out. If you have access to multiple Azure subscriptions, you can always go AZ account set subscription. Just gotta spell subscription correctly. And here I'm gonna access my concierge subscription. This just means every Azure CLI command I run after this is gonna use my concierge subscription. So there we go. Now I could do all sorts of fun things. I can create an app service plan. Now, how do I create an app service plan? Well, if you've never used Azure CLI before, you can actually go in and look up the Azure CLI. The way you do that is docs.com. And you can type in Azure or click Azure and then go look up the CLI. I'm going to give you the short link to this, docs.microsoft.com/CLI. This takes you to Azure CLI documentation. I'm going to put this as an announcement in Q&A too, because I like to post those announcements. All right. Now, from the Azure CLI, I can look up stuff. So, for instance, if I want to look up the reference, I can look up how to interact with Azure App Service. I see there's a command called App Service. Click Summary, and it says, okay, AZ App Service. I can do all sorts of things. Like I can app service domain create, app service plan. That sounds like what I want to do. App service plan create. That sounds like what I want to do. Okay, AZ app service plan create. At a minimum, I need a name and a resource group. I can specify other things like location, whether it's Linux or not. And you see lots of examples of how I can specify this. So let's use one of these examples. AZ app service plan create. And by the way, I know somebody's going to say, hey, where can I get the code that you're showing and the scripts that you're showing in these demos? The answer is earlier in the session, I posted in the Q&A a link to aka.ms app service at scale -exercises. And this has a link to our show notes where I have all the demo scripts I'm posting today. So just wanted to call that out ahead of time. That link is also in the Q&A. All right, so app service plan create. I almost forgot where I was. Resource group. I have a resource group called MS-US-Dev. Next one is, let's see, name. What do I want to name this? I'm going to call this app service plan JS plan. Where do I want to locate this? East US. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? I want to set a SKU, S1. And this time, instead of being Windows, I'm going to use the special is Linux flag. Basically says create a Linux version instead of a Windows version. Hit enter. It's going to create an app service plan for me within my Azure subscription. So just give that a second and look at Q&A questions. Somebody says, hey, when should you use Azure CLI versus ARM templates? The answer is there's really no reason to use one over the other. It's really 100% about your comfort level. If your team likes using the CLI, use the CLI. If you like using PowerShell, use Azure PowerShell commandlets. If you like using ARM templates, I'm very much an ARM template person, use ARM templates. Use what works for your team. All underneath the hood, everything uses ARM templates anyways. But even with ARM templates, Bicep, BICEP, is a project to come up with a different language to use with ARM templates that you can generate ARM templates out. So this is all about the putting the most amount of tools in people's hands so they can use what they're comfortable with and be productive regardless if you use one over the other. So this is not a situation where if you use the Azure CLI, you're gonna have more features than if you use ARM templates. They all have many of the same features. It's just really about what you're comfortable with as a team. So I said, AKA link, will you provide lab instances where you can try it out? I know Matt, who's hosted us, just answered, oh, sorry, we don't have a lab link. I promise you, I'm going to show you where you can actually get hands-on with online labs at the end of this session. It's just I haven't revealed that just yet. All right, so we created an app service plan. I'm going to go back and go to the Azure Portal and go back to my MS-US Dev resource group. And there's my JS plan, app service plan. Nice, sitting there, sitting pretty for me. Now, I want to create a web app. So if I scroll down, I'll see Azure Web Apps somewhere in this list. There we go, Azure Web Apps. And there's static web app and web app. Today, I want to create a web app. So Azure Web Apps, so AZ Web App, and I want to create. And it says, okay, you need a name, you need to point to a plan, and you need a resource group. Add a minimal. Let's do that. AZ Web App, create. Resource group, that's MS US Dev again. The plan is called JS Plan. The name of my web app, Sydney Linux Empty Web App. That's fun. Let's see, what else I want to specify here? You know what? I want to specify runtime. So I'm going to go to runtime, and I'm going to specify Node 12 long-term support, and hit enter. Now, you're probably saying, hey, hold on. You just specified something you never said anything about. What is a runtime? Where does runtime come from? This is unfair. You're cheating. You just came up with a command you haven't prompted some. Remember when I created the web app and we went into Portal and we saw that you could choose your different runtimes? You can do the same thing for Azure CLI, but that syntax might be unfamiliar if you never worked with it before. So there's a command for that too. AZ web app list runtimes, and then you can either specify Linux or not if you want to see the one specific to Linux. I hit enter. It'll show me all the different runtimes, including Java, Node, PHP, Ruby, Python, and .NET, whether it's traditional, whether it's .NET or the older .NET Core. So that's where the runtimes came from. That wasn't out of nowhere. So let's go look for that web app we're creating. Go to MS-US Dev, refresh. Sydney's Linux Empty Web App. We're going to hit browse, and we have a nice little placeholder page. It should show up any second now. It's like a watch pot bowling. Now that I say it should show up any second now, it's going to take a second to load that hosting start.html file. That's my luck. I wouldn't worry too much about it. Now, I'll show you two different ways to create a web app. What I like to do is go in and deploy something to this web app. Then I'll see if I can knock out some of these questions in the Q&A. So we have the Sydney Linux Empty Web App, and it's actually fine and it's not showing the placeholder page. I'm about to deploy something to it. So let's put this all the way on the right-hand side so I can get to it. And from here, I'm going to go to this place called the Deployment Center. Now, the Deployment Center allows me to deploy code to this web app. So I have some sample code. I have a really simple Node.js website. It's just meant to be a placeholder page for Contoso Spaces, a fictional real estate company that's selling office space. So that is at github.com/Microsoft Docs/MS-Learn deploy web apps. Just like everything else, I'm going to put this in Q&A so that you have access to that hyperlink. All right. Now, I'm here, I see this really cool repo, and I'm gonna just create a fork in my own organization. So I create a fork. And there we go. We're even with main. And I can go in and see that I have this sample node application. And I promise you, there's nothing to this. It's just an index.html file. And I wish I could say there was anything more. I think it's Express running, and it's just serving media using the public folder. And then when you just send a request to the root, it just sends the content for index.html. So nothing crazy at all going here. No super complex app. Now I'm going to go back to this Sydney Linux empty web app. There's that placeholder page I was telling you about. Actually, this is the right placeholder page. It says, hey, node developers, since I chose the node stack. I'm going to go, and for my deployment center, that's where I clicked. I'm going to select GitHub. And if you haven't signed in before, you would sign in to GitHub here. I've already done it before, so it's popped up my GitHub account. But if not, it will just have you click a button, and then it'll do a pop-up to sign in to GitHub. For my organization, I'm going to just choose my own user organization. For my repository, I'm going to choose that repository that we just forked. And for my branch, I'm going to use the main branch. Now, it's already identified that we're running the Node 12 LTS stack on this app service, so it automatically assumes that's what we want to continue to work with. If I click preview file, it's going to show me this YAML GitHub Actions workflow file that will build and deploy my Node.js application to Azure Web Apps. So here we see on any pushes to the main branch, it's going to first run the build job, runs on an Ubuntu agent. It's going to check out my code from GitHub. It's going to configure the agent to run Node latest stable 12 version, npm install. Then it's going to run npm build if that script exists, and then npm run test if that script exists. Then it's going to upload the results of my build. So everything in the current folder is going to upload as an artifact within GitHub Actions. The next job it's going to run is called deploy, which will run on Ubuntu agent. This needs the build job to run successfully first, so deploy won't run until build runs. It's going to set an environment variable for production. It's going to download that artifact we just uploaded and then deploy it to our web app instance using a publish profile, which is just an internal mechanism to do the deployments. So the great thing about this is that just looking at this is a really simple GitHub action. If you're really interested in GitHub Actions, I know Matt's itching to post the link here, but we have tons of videos, even a YouTube playlist on how to build your own GitHub Actions. So going away from this, I'm going to hit X, I'm going to hit save. And here's what's going to happen. It's actually going to create that workflow file in my repo. There it is, GitHub workflows. There's that workflow file that we just previewed. And it's going to run a GitHub action. Pretty cool. You can also get to that from here within the Azure Portal. You'll see that we're connected to GitHub. If we click logs, we'll see that it's queued up a build today. If I click build deploy logs, it'll jump immediately into GitHub Actions where it's running the build right now. It looks like it already ran npm install. That was fast. And it's uploading our artifact. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that app service is wonderful, but it's uploading everything. So it's uploading not just my application files, but everything in the node modules folder. So this is something that works most of the time, but for some, especially some React and Angular applications, can become a little bit extreme. So after this, I'm going to show you another service that's specifically designed for static web applications. They're using JavaScript for their interactivity. So looks like it's already uploaded and it's working the deploy job now. Let's look at some of the Q&A questions. Somebody says, hey, if you have a single app service plan, can some of them be web apps that run code stack and you deploy code, and can some of them be containers? Yes, you can mix and match. You absolutely can. Somebody says, hey, Linux and Windows, can you mix and match wherever you have Linux and Windows app service plans together in a resource group? Is actually on the documentation page now, but for a long time you couldn't do that. Resource group had to have Linux or Windows, but now that functionality is available for new resource groups created, and I think older resource groups, they're being updated to have that functionality. That was kind of a limitation within the way resource groups was built in Azure. All right, somebody says, hey, we're doing some really cool things on function apps, and we love to have a CLI command to kind of listen to a function app. We have a, and Matt, if you don't mind replying to that, I think it's from Kevin in Q&A with our email. We have an email for our team where, like tricky questions like that, we love to take some time and actually dig into it and get you a solid answer. Somebody says, hey, a Packer file. Is an ARM template close to like a Packer file? The answer I would give is it's closer to kind of like how you have your template configurations and like other cloud providers or template. If you've done anything like Terraform templates, it's a little bit closer to that. All right. Somebody says, hey, we are having a hard time where we have a React front end. We just don't know where we should use static web apps or just a static website hosted on Azure storage. How do you make that decision? Where do you separate them? And my answer is hang tight. I will answer that question in a little bit. I promise I have a really good answer for you. So it looks like our web app has been deployed. Let's see, let's refresh. Here's our Node.js placeholder page. Let you know that our application is coming soon. So really, really simple demo, but I just want you to see how streamlined that can be. And the great thing is, since this is a GitHub Actions workflow file, your team is more than welcome to modify this, change it based upon your requirements. Everything's already wired up, so any changes I make to this application are going to show up, and it's going to automatically trigger a deployment within the deployment center for this Azure web app. All right, now, moving forward from there, I love app service, but there's a really cool and exciting service out right now called Azure Static Web Apps. And what Azure Static Web Apps does is a version app service solely focused on those static web applications where you have static files for the page, and then in many cases where you're running your interactivity client side, whether it's using something like a JavaScript framework, Blazor, anything like that. And I want to kind of take some time to dig into that today. So I'm going to show you 3 different ways to create a static web app. You're going to notice a lot of the stuff that we did here for Azure App Service web apps. It's going to be very similar to how we do it for static web apps. So just for fun, I'm going to go ahead and close everything I have open and just jump right back to my MSUS Dev resource group that's now jumping with 2 app service plans and 2 app services. Let's have some fun. Let's open up our, and by the way, if you haven't seen this before, this is Windows Terminal I'm running. It has a Quake mode, which is, they announced that build, and it's probably my favorite feature now. Just Windows key and tilde, and I can pop down the Windows Terminal wherever I'm at, and this completely changed my life. So from here, I'm going to create a directory called vanilla HTML. And I'm going to open Visual Studio Code in the context of my vanilla HTML directory. And here's Visual Studio Code. I'm going to zoom in quite a lot to make today work. All right, I'm going to create an index.html file. And since my extension is .html, when the editor opens for that, and forgive this, I have so many extensions of Visual Studio Code that it takes a second for my projects to spin up. That's 100% my fault. So we're going to go to getbootstrap.com. I'm going to pop this into the Q&A for anyone who's interested. Getbootstrap.com. Okay. And from here, I'm going to click the Get Started button. Now they have, hey, you want to work with Bootstrap? Here's CSS and JavaScript. Here's a starter template. You know what? I'm going to copy the starter template. And I'm going to go right back to Visual Studio Code and paste that starter template in. And just for fun, I'll test it out locally. I'll copy my path, go right back to my browser and paste that path in. And you'll see, hello world. Nothing crazy here. Somebody said, hey, that shortcut you just said, that's Windows and the tilde key to open the Quake mode. All right, so we have our hello world page. I'm going to create a new, let's see, go to my GitHub account and create a new repository. I'm going to call this repository vanilla HTML. Just make it public. I'm going to delete these right after the series, but just I make it public just for fun. And it says, okay, here's the Git URI using HTTPS. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to do the whole Git thing. So Git and actually CD vanilla HTML, Git init to initialize my repository. I have one file, so first commit index.html. Then I'm going to, wrong window. Git remote add origin, paste that in. Now that I have a remote, I'm going to publish this branch to that remote. You could either click there or you could have hit push. Any of those options would have worked. And now I publish everything to GitHub. So if I refresh, index.html is live here on my GitHub repo. So I have a really simple repo with just a single HTML file. I'm going to go back to MSUS Dev, and I'm going to, I can create my static web app from here. So I can go to the portal, Microsoft Azure, create a resource. I can create that Azure static web app. Just like I went into documentation, select a web, got to select web, and select the Azure static web app. Or I can do it with the CLI, or I can do it with Visual Studio Code. So let's try Visual Studio Code first. For Visual Studio Code, I'm going to go to extensions, and I'm going to download, I already have it, but I'll just show you how you would do this. I'll download the static web apps extension. So Azure static web apps, and at this point you click install. That's how you get the extension. Once you have the extension, there'll be an Azure icon. I'm zoomed in really far, that's why you can't see those icons. And you see I have extensions for app service, Azure storage and static web apps. I have a lot of subscriptions, so I'm going to go to my concierge subscription. I see I don't have any static web apps deployed here, so I can either right click, create static web app, or click the plus button. I'm going to click the plus button. It says, okay, concierge subscription. I'm going to select that. It's going to verify my workspace. It says, okay, what do I want my static web app to be called? Sydney Vanilla Static Web App. Hit enter. Okay, what type of application is this? Is this Angular, React, Vue.js, Blazor? What do we got? Well, it's none of the above. I'm going to select custom. It says, okay, when you select custom, where's your application code? Well, my application code is in the root of the directory, so I'll just stick with this default, hit enter. It's okay. When you built this application, where is the build output? Well, unfortunately for me, there's no build steps in this, so my build output would be in this same directory. So I'll just, same directory, hit enter. Oh man, I actually have the wrong, I'm signed into the wrong subscription. So at this point, normally it would create a resource group and then you create the static web app. I'm going to say, hey, let's use the existing resource group, MSUS Dev. I have a demo user I use for whenever I'm doing webinars, and that user, rightfully so, doesn't have permission to create their own brand new resource groups. That's good security. But I forgot all about that before I did the demo, so forgive me for that. Okay, so let's create a new static web app called Sydney Vanilla Static Web App. We see we have it here. We can see that it's a GitHub CI action. We can see the status of it. I can go back to the Azure Portal and refresh. Sydney Vanilla Static Web App. It should be showing the placeholder page. I don't think it's deployed anything yet. Yep. If I click GitHub Action Runs, it's going to take me to my vanilla HTML GitHub repo, but it's going to take me to the Actions tab where I can see that my CI/CD build is running. Let's see, build and deploy job. The first thing it's doing is setting up the agent. Then it's actually pulling the Azure/static web apps deploy Docker container image. That's where the build's going to be performed. For people who have never worked with GitHub Actions before, in our wonderful webinar series that we had on GitHub Actions, we taught you how to use Docker containers as your agents. So, and that's just great because it comes with a whole bunch of tools. Now we're doing the build. There's really nothing to build, so build is going really fast. One of the cool things I want to call out here is our build is being performed by Microsoft Oryx. I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing that, but nobody's ever corrected me yet. Microsoft Oryx is the build engine that Azure App Service and static web apps uses to perform all these wonderful builds. Oryx is really cool because Oryx can detect what type of application it is and then perform a build. And if you wonder how Oryx does it, you can actually go to the GitHub repo and look at the code. So it looks like our build is complete. So if I refresh, There's our hello world vanilla HTML file. We can take it a step further. We can go in and do the same thing for like more complex applications. So I have, if you've never used it before, Next.js is a framework that's running on top of React. And it's really great if you're like me and I just like to create something quick and I want to minimize the amount of unpopular circumstance to get to my application. I love Next.js for that. So github.com/Microsoft Docs. I have another repo. This one is going to be MS-Learn multi-container web app. And if you say multi-container web app, that sounds familiar. That's because we're going to come back to this repository in our container session next week. I'm going to, like I did for everything else, I'm going to put this hyperlink into the chat. Now, what I like to do here is I like to do a deployment from this repository. So I'm going to just do it just like we did last time. I'm going to go ahead and fork this into my Sidney Andrews organization and just let it think for a second. And now I have this little bit more complex Next.js web application. It's not super complex, but we're taking a step at a time here, right? Now from here, I can go to the portal and I'm going to create another static web app. I'm just showing you 3 different ways to create them. So I selected create a resource and I'm going to select web. And then from here, I'm going to select Azure Static Web App. I'm going to select my MS US Dev resource group. I'm going a little bit faster now because you've seen this before. I'm going to call this a Sidney Next Static App. That's globally unique. I'm going to choose a standard plan. I'm going to deploy this to ECUS2. And where do I want to deploy it from? Well, I want to deploy it from GitHub. So I sign in with my GitHub account. And then my organization is going to be my name. This was multi-container web app. And then main. Now there's some build presets. We can do those build presets by, instead of using presets, I always like to do it manually. So I select custom. My application is in the root of this repo. Just showing you what I mean there. In the root repo is my code for my application. If it was anywhere else, that's where you would change the application. I don't have an Azure function, so I don't need to put anything for API location. But my code, when built, will output to the out folder, so that's what I'm going to put in here, out. Hit review plus create. Hit create. And there we go, it's creating my static web app that's going to deploy code from that Next.js GitHub repo. So hit go to resource. That web app itself comes up pretty fast, but let's check out that GitHub action run. There we go, we got CI run going, build and deploy, and setting up the job. It's going to soon download that Docker container to run as the build agent. So just looking at some Q&A questions, we got Q&A questions coming in. Can you use other repositories for static web apps? I haven't played around with it yet, but that's the other option. I personally haven't tried it yet. So if you're trying to run into trouble with it, we have an email address that we can use to help you get to the problem with it. Is that Matt's actually posting that as a response to your question now? That's just me being just completely transparent. I have not tried it with anything other than GitHub just yet, and that's just from a personal side. Somebody says, hey, we use Azure DevOps for our source code repos, build, deployment pipelines. Should we start considering Azure GitHub Actions? The answer is use what you're comfortable with. They both first tier products. You'll see a lot of overlap in the way their agents work. So once you learn one, learning the other is not that bad. I wouldn't call it trivial, but it's not tremendously difficult. So if you built YAML-based pipelines for Azure DevOps, you'll do it just as easily building them for GitHub Actions. So we've done Matt and I have done a webinar series on both GitHub Actions and on Azure DevOps, and a lot of the content is exactly the same with just maybe a little change here and a little change there. So that's my way of saying it's worth knowing both. And if your team's using one, keep using it. No need to change just yet. All right, so we finished uploading our artifact. Now it's deploying. So it looks like deployment succeeded at the 15-second mark, and our application is live. So if we refresh, there's our Contostal Spaces Next.js application. We can look at a list of locations and look at metadata for a certain office building location. So we have a wonderful sample application here that we deployed that was Next.js. I just want to do one more and then see if I can answer a couple more Q&A questions, because we're definitely we're running way past the amount of time I thought this would take, but really excited to continue to share stuff with you. So there's a really cool GitHub organization, github.com/static-web-dev. You'll say, static web dev, what is that? And I'm going to put it in the announcements. It's a list of repositories created by the Azure Static Web Apps teams that are examples of static web applications that you could deploy to Azure pretty quickly. So there's templates for, Angular, Vue, React, all sorts of wonderful stuff. So we are going to try the Vue.js basic one. So static web dev /Vue basic. Put that in the chat too. Somebody says, hey, static web apps still in preview, right? Yes, but static web apps is built on top of Oryx, the same build engine is used in App Service. So it's a pretty mature preview service. So I highly recommend trying it out and using it and stress testing it now, because it's definitely a pretty mature service with really great documentation. And like I said, Oryx, the build engine, built for App Service too. So there's a lot of legacy behind this. This isn't just a fly-by-night service. So definitely it's worth checking out, even though it still has the preview tag. All right, so we have this Vue basic template. So I'm going to hit use this template to create a repository in my organization with this code. So I'm going to call this Vue basic, and I'm going to create a public repository. I'm not going to include all the branches. I just want the main branch. So I hit create repository from template, and I have my Vue basic application within the Sydney Andrews org on GitHub. And I'll even say generated from. Wonderful. Going to open up the Quick tab, clear my screen, CD back. And from here, I'm going to git clone HTTPS github.com, my Sydney Andrews org, Vue basics name report.git, hit enter, CD in the Vue basic, and it open code in the current directory. Just show this is really simple Vue application. Closed code. I apologize about that. Really simple application. If I go to source, I see that main.js, and you see app.vue. It says hello, and then prints out the value. Value right here is world. Nothing crazy. That's hello world. Now from here, I'm going to go into the portal, and I'm going to go to my resource group. We have in the MS-US Dev resource group, we should have 2 or 3, I can't remember, 2 static web apps, vanilla and next. I'm going to create one for Vue. So here's what I'm going to do. Since I'm already logged into Azure CLI, why not do it here? AZ static web app, just like we had AZ web app. This time we'll hit create, resource group, MS-US Dev, location. Let's do East US 2. Name, Sydney Vue static app. Okay. Source. Where do I want to deploy from? HTTPS, github.com, Sydney Andrews, Vue basic. Awesome. Go to main branch. When we build this Vue application, where's it going to output? That's the output location. Well, I don't know. Let me go open up Visual Studio Code and try this out. So I know, well, actually, I'll take a step back. I go to my package JSON. We have a serve, a build, and a lint script. So let's try them out. Npm Run serve. I forgot Npm install. Npm install, then Npm Run serve. Just running a little too fast. Sometimes you get excited, right? And so I'm just looking in Q&A, make sure I didn't miss any questions so far. Looks like there's one question I wanted to get to towards the end. I'll get back to that. Well, you know what? Let me get to it now while npm is installing. So somebody asked, there's a really cool service for storage where you can host static web apps or websites. Why would you choose Azure Static Web Apps over that? Well, the cool thing about Azure Static Web Apps is you're not only getting the hosting, but you're getting that Oryx build engine that actually detects the type of application is and does the proper build for the framework. That's cognizant of how npm and the package.json files work, and will run that npm run build and other commands. So what you're getting with Azure Static Web Apps is not only the hosting of the application, but the CI/CD through using GitHub Actions, using GitHub, and the Oryx build engine that will take care of building correctly based upon your project type. All right, so npm installs ran. So npm run serve. It should be localhost 8080 if I'm correct. Can't remember what port set up here. I always do funky stuff with ports because I'm running so many dev frameworks. Localhost 8080. So let's just make sure this works. Localhost 8080. There's hello world, so that's running. Beautiful. I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. npm run build. We'll do our build. Remember, we looked at the GitHub Actions, and it runs npm run build if that's available. So npm run build is going to do our build of our Vue.js application, and it looks like it builds into the dist, or distribution directory. That's there. We look at our git ignore. We look, that was another hint that that directory is ignored. So that's our distribution directory. That's our output directory that we're going to use. So opening the quick mode back up, we had our output location. That's going to be dist. Finally, you can put in your GitHub token here using the token flag, but there's a really cool one called login with GitHub. That way I don't have to copy and paste GitHub tokens. I don't like that. It makes me nervous. So I'll hit enter. It's going to say, okay, go to github.com/login device and enter this code. So I'll copy that and go to this URL. github.com/login-device. I'll paste in this code, hit continue. It says, hey, Azure CLI wants to authorize. Let's go ahead and authorize. We're all set. So open up the quick mode again. It's waiting. And there we go. It's created our static web app. We'll go to MSUS Dev. And just for fun, we'll refresh. Let's see. Give it a second to show up. Make sure I deploy it to the right resource group. It's Vue Basic. What's name did I use? Sydney Vue Static App. There we go, Sydney Vue Static App. I can go to the URL, should be our placeholder page. I can go to the GitHub Actions run. There's our CI build. Should be pretty far along. I think this takes about a minute to build. So there we go. There's a build and deploy. It's checked out our code. It's using npm, using node 14, npm version 6.14. It's running npm install. And now it's running npm run build to create our dist directory. Now it's copying files from dist directory, zipping them up. Now it's deploying those files. All of that was based upon those that command we ran. And Oryx is done. It's uploading. And as it uploads, it polls to see whether the application is deployed. So like a third of a second in, its status is in progress. It's going to check it again in about 10 seconds. Let's see, a little bit longer than 10 seconds. At 15 seconds, status is still in progress. I always make a joke about watch pop bowling. Our deployment is successful. So if we go to Azure Static Web Apps and refresh, there's our hello world for our Vue.js app, and it's CI. So if I go to Visual Studio Code and change this from a div to h1, and change this from hello to thanks with exclamation point, everyone, save, updated message will be my commit message. Commit that, push it from my local instance. Oop, I forgot to merge changes. And sign in to GitHub using my browser. Yep, forgot to pull first. I got to pull, merge, and then push. Fun stuff. Should have pulled first. That's why I always tell Dream Devs on my team, always pull first. And then we go back and we go into our actions. We'll see a new build is kicked off. Now, I see a couple comments already over. Somebody says, hey, we're currently reviewing Terraform for deploying our web apps. Can we use that with static web apps? Yes. I don't remember where static web apps is in the Terraform preview, but you can either use one of the built-in modules, or you can just kind of roll your own. You can just do a regular just resource deployment and specify the resource provider and date, and that'll work just fine. Somebody says, hey, is there a web page for why we should consider static web apps over static storage and static websites in a storage account? And the answer is that really depends on whether you want Oryx and Azure to do your build or whether you want to do it manually. If you're doing it manually and you just want to push the storage account, you can. That's fine. But with static web apps, you get a lot of the same features as app service, which is you don't get with a storage account. So for example, if you want to set up custom domains, if you want to set up scaling out, if you want to configure with built-in Azure Functions integration, if you want to tie in the application insights, all of that's available to a static web app. And that'd be a little bit, I wouldn't say impossible because you can, but it'd be a little bit more hands-on with a storage account. Somebody says, hey, look, we are doing all of our builds on Azure DevOps. Why would we care about Works? And the cool thing is, if you're doing all your builds, you don't have to. You can just deploy your application like when I did the vanilla HTML. And when it says, hey, we're going to run npm install, npm run build, it doesn't catch anything. It basically tells Oryx that, hey, we don't need you to do anything other than just put this code as is on a static web app, and that'll work just fine. Somebody says, hey, React View, they have their own package manager. Yes, you can actually set up, and it's in the Azure Static Web Apps documentation, how to set that up to work with their package managers. Like, hey, if I want to deploy ASP.NET, like ASP.NET Core, whether it's a web API or ASP.NET project, can I do that with this? You'd be looking at app service web apps instead of static web apps, because app service web apps will actually do the full build that's necessary. However, if you're doing Blazor, which has a static HTML file, and you're doing Blazor client side with no server side aspect, static web apps works beautifully for a Blazor client side. All right, our second build is done. We'll refresh, and we'll get our little thank you message. I wish I should have made it a lot bigger than that, but I showed a lot today. And one of the things I want to share with you again, I shared this link at the very beginning. I'll leave it out here for a second, and I will create an announcement in the Q&A. But basically, we have this wonderful link, and we're going to come back to it every session in this series. And this link gives you a couple things. First off, we have a nice little table. I need to fix the formatting of this with our show notes. So for every session in this 4-part series, we're going to have code samples, hyperlinks, all these different pages you saw me go to will all be here. And you can see exactly how I did things if you want to replicate it yourself in your own subscription. Taking a step further, we also have links to hands-on labs on Microsoft Learn that you can complete yourself so you can take your learning further. And many of these hands-on labs within Microsoft Learn will allow you to do it within a special subscription. So, for example, you saw me publish a Vue and a React, which is that Next.js application, to Azure Static Web Apps. You can actually go to this Learn module, hit Start, and I'll just skip ahead to the exercise, and it'll show you how to do all those things I just did so that you can do it yourself. Here's another Microsoft Learn module, and they're pretty cool because they allow you to not only do these hands-on exercises, many of them come with a sandbox, so you don't have to use your own Azure subscription. This is a great module that says how to deploy things to Azure App Service, which is web apps. And if you want to deploy an ASP.NET application or a Java application or Node.js application, you just choose your development language, and all the steps change based upon the development language you prefer. And this is really great because you can go in, get hands-on, and the greatest thing about it is that if you use the sandbox, you don't have to use your own Azure subscription. It gives you an Azure subscription for an hour or two to do this Microsoft Learn module, and it will even check your work as you go along. So really cool stuff. I really hope you all get a chance to get hands-on with that. I'm just going to see some more Q&A questions before we wrap up today. Somebody says, hey, Blazor static web apps. Oh, Matt beat me to it. But basically, you could definitely deploy Blazor to a static web app. Static web apps. Do you have an out-of-box CDN setting, and could it be connected to a CDN? Yes, you can connect to Azure CDN service. Azure Static Web Apps work just like App Service and Storage, which has really tight native integration with the Azure CDN service. Hey, Azure CLI. Does Azure CLI handle Git and npm commands? No, the Azure CLI is very specific to Azure. You can still run your own Git and npm commands, unless I'm misunderstanding your question. Azure CLI is just very specific to doing things in Azure. Somebody said, hey, if I try to hands-on lab, will allow me to run within Ubuntu on Windows Subsystem for Linux? The two hands-on labs that I gave as examples don't really use a lot of CLI code. They are very portal centric, but I'll show you a really cool one. Just open this. No, we have one coming up in the next session that uses Bash, and you can do that directly from Windows Subsystem Linux, Ubuntu running in that. Somebody says, hey, I have a production Azure web app, and how do you recommend you troubleshoot it? When you create a web app, it's going to have an option. I'm going to just show you a real quick example here. Just put any name here. There we go. I'm just putting whatever to get to the next step. When you go through the step-by-step wizard to creating a web app, there's an option to enable application insights. And actually, I think I need to select a different stack for this. Let me just .NET 5. Oh, you know what? Let me pull up another. It's telling me that my subscription doesn't support it. So I have a demo subscription. So I apologize. From time to time, I run into something, say, hey, you don't support it. So I'm going to go into my real subscription. Let me zoom in real good so everybody can see it. Hit create a resource, create web app. Code. Let's do node 14, run it on Linux, premium plan. Go to monitoring. Now I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. Linux plan. I'm logged into. I apologize. I'm trying to show you how to do monitoring, and I was logged in as the wrong user. Now I'm trying to figure out if I'm logged in as the right user. All sorts of craziness. All right, so I'm gonna create a new resource group. I'm gonna create a new web app, and I apologize about making you wait this long. Just gonna get this demo going. Go to monitoring. Come on, did I click the right buttons? There we go. All right, so when you get to the monitoring tab, you can enable application insights. And application insights will give you a very deep mechanism for not only collecting metrics and performance data for your app service instance, but kind of analyzing errors. So application insights is more than just APM that collects metrics. It gives you visualizations. It gives you help. So for instance, if people are visiting your website and it's down, it will actually show you, hey, this is why it's down. And so application insights used to by default come with every app service web app. It's no longer by default anymore. But you can definitely turn it on, and it'll create a resource alongside your web app that allows you to collect all that metrics. And application insights, when you go to it in a portal, has tons of metric visualizations that'd be really useful. All right. One more Q&A question. We're going to wrap up for today. Somebody says, hey, I'm writing an application and I want to get started with it. I'm writing in Python, and I want to be able to send myself a text message on certain events with the price. Can I do this with static web apps? Can I do this with another platform? Absolutely. You can use a service like Azure App Service or static web apps. And with App Service, you can write your Python application and deploy it. And then once you have your Python application with Azure App Service, you can use a service like Azure Functions to listen to events and then do things. Whether it's that Azure function runs code directly or triggers an Azure Logic app that will send text messages using a service like Twilio. There's all sorts of really cool things. There's a Microsoft Azure MVP, goes by the name of Kevin Griffin. He does a lot of talks about using Azure Logic apps and Azure functions with Twilio. He's He's been deeply like hands-on with that company, and they are one of the services that show up when you create a Logic app as one of the first class experiences for sending text messages from Azure. So Kevin Griffin is his name. He has tons of stuff on YouTube about it. Really great resource for stuff like that. Somebody says, do we need an extra logging framework? We use Application Insights. You can absolutely use extra logging framework. I do it. I will install, I don't want to promote a certain framework because there's like a ton of them, but I'll install a logging framework and collect additional metrics on top of the built-in ones. Because if you just use Application Insights, it's just going to be using built-in telemetry, built-in metrics, and built-in logs. But I'll use a logging framework so I can collect additional logs and use that with Application Insights. That's the same thing true with any APM tool. Last question, I'm going to wrap it up. Hey, Azure Static Web Apps. Can we do something like using Azure AD and authenticate to a static web app? Now, there's documentation on the Azure Static Web Apps page on how to do that. I don't have a demo ready for that, but I encourage you to go to that docs.com. Let me go back to my browser with everything zoomed in. And this will be the last question we'll wrap up for today, docs.com. And go to Azure, and I'll open App Service so I can show you how to do it there. Go to Web and Azure Static Web Apps. You can see how-to guides and concepts, and you can see for security, you can set up authentication authorization to your static web app using Azure Active Directory. You can also set up from the how-to guides. You can set up all sorts of other features, like how you secure secrets between Azure Static Web Apps and other services. For App Service, you can even go to Concepts and Sample. I think it's under Concepts. Yep, Security, and how to set it up so people have to authenticate to Azure Active Directory to access your Azure App Service instance. It has a whole bunch of technical explanation of how it works underneath the hood. Matt's probably jumping into joy. We have a wonderful series on Azure Active Directory development using the Microsoft Identity Platform, and we have conceptual videos about that on YouTube. So definitely a lot of really good stuff going around. Thank you all for being patient. We try to answer as many questions as we can, but Matt, that email is msusdev@microsoft.com. Is that right?
Yes, that is the email.
If I didn't think of something, if I didn't get to your question, msusdev@microsoft.com. We love your questions. Keep sending them back. We got another session coming up after this where we're going to go over staging and deployments. Might not be as long as this one, but it's definitely going to be really meaty and really useful and build upon a lot of stuff we worked on today. So we really look forward to seeing you all there, and sign up for that session and all the remaining sessions, the one on containers, the one on integrating with other Azure services. We really look forward to seeing you all there.
Thank you so much, Sydney, and do hope to see everyone back on Thursday.